Well, this week the news broke that Meta is going to be protecting us from misinformation and disinformation, spending a small fortune of their own money making sure that we don't get misinformed on the Voice referendum. How very kind and altruistic of them. There couldn't possibly be anything nefarious going on in the background, could there? Well, I must admit my spider senses started tingling when I read this news because I've seen firsthand what happens when Meta gets involved in deciding what's true and what's not. Namely, they get it wrong. Even Mark Zuckerberg admitted that they get it wrong in a recent interview, and yet here we are, going back to square one with absolutely no lessons learned. Someone else who I know cares a lot about freedom of speech and has been affected by being wrongly branded as someone spreading misinformation is none other than Rukshan Fernando, who joins me now. Rukshan, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
Kofa, thanks for having me on. And I can't believe Mark Zuckerberg and election integrity and Meta. There's a couple of words you don't want to hear together.
No, not at all. Now, Rukshan, you put out a great video about this the other day, and we'll put the link to that video in the show notes for this. But I wanted to get you on here just to break this down a little bit. I went on a bit of a deep dive, and I was originally going to do an editorial on this, and I went down a bit of a rabbit hole here. I've got to admit, I rabbit holed a little bit on this one because this is an issue that's very, very close to my heart because I've seen where this goes, and I know that you have too. Let me take you through what I found before we have a chat about it. Now, this is the Financial Review article. You posted this one to your own Twitter and other social media platforms as well. This is the Financial Review article telling us all about this wonderful program about how Facebook will tackle misinformation on The Voice. Now, I couldn't help but notice this paragraph here, and apologies, it hasn't quite cropped correctly, but Meta will give an undisclosed amount to the Australian Associated Press, RMIT's Fact Lab, and Agency France Press. Now, these sound like three very reputable organisations. They couldn't possibly be in any way biased, could they? So I went to the RMIT Fact Lab website because I wanted to go to a primary source. I wanted to see for myself. These people, of course, are the pinnacle of integrity, of unbiased fact-checking, and you would not find anything on their website that could indicate any kind of a bias on this issue. Here's a series of articles illustrating all of the facts that they have checked, and they've debunked so many myths, weirdly all on the no side. Strange. They haven't debunked any facts on the yes side. There must be no misinformation on the yes side. Oh, wait a minute, what's that down the bottom of the website? Oh yeah, the welcome to country. Yeah, it couldn't possibly be that these people get all of their funding from a government that is going to require them and hold them over a barrel to have a particular view on these issues. Could it be, Rook? I'm just a crazy conspiracy theorist, right?
Yeah. Nah, look, when I look at these organizations like RMIT Fact Lab and potentially the other organizations which are receiving funding, I think many people who look at these fact checkers come across this notion that they're independent and they don't have these type of relationships. And now we're finding that actually they are integrated with these kind of companies themselves who have their own agendas in many ways. And it's very interesting to see that they're being very open about this as well. So, you know, for those of us who have been subject of fact checks, you know, we know how shady and sneaky they are in terms of how they administer these so-called fact checks. And like you pointed out, that website, RMIT Fact Lab, it's all against the No campaign. And that doesn't happen because if we've been following the news, many of your listeners and viewers would know, there has been all types of information put up by the government, for instance, Anthony Albanese himself, which could potentially deserve some type of fact-checking. But why isn't this organization doing it? And we need to ask these questions because during the COVID era, this same organization was hell-bent on pushing one particular narrative. And now their pet project is the Voice to Parliament. And now they're receiving this extra funding from, Meta, from Facebook, from Mark Zuckerberg. What do you think their pet project's going to be? Like, it's already obvious what they're doing before getting this funding. What do you think they're going to do now?
Yeah, and it actually gets worse, believe it or not. I'm going to continue to go through the Fact Lab website. Now, the Fact Lab actually did a fact check on misinformation about itself. So this is like a classic case of, the police investigated themselves and found that the police did nothing wrong. The fact checkers fact-checked an article about themselves and found that there's nothing to fear. So no, RMIT Fact Lab is not set to rig the Voice referendum. This is from May, just a month or so ago. And in this article, in this fact check, is this amazing statement. The verdict is that it's false. RMIT Fact Lab is an independent fact-checking organisation. This comes back to what you were just saying there, Rukshan. It is accredited by the International Fact-Checking Network. Who fact-checked the International Fact-Checking Network, by the way? Do we know who they are? I mean, yeah, okay, you could go to the website, etc. But honestly, like, they're quoting some organisation that none of us have ever heard of and has absolutely no credibility whatsoever. And this is where they're trying to derive their credibility from. But they say it does not receive any funding or editorial direction from political parties, advocacy groups, or lobby groups. And this is where I want to get serious for a second here, because this statement really genuinely troubles me. They say we don't get any funding from political parties, except that political parties, in this case the Labor Party, which holds government in Australia, leans on Meta and goes, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, hey, we're really worried about this misinformation on this highly partisan referendum that our political survival really depends on us winning. We're really worried about this misinformation, guys. And Mark Zuckerberg and Meta go, yeah, we're picking up what you're putting down. And they spend some of their corporate money on these fact checkers, knowing very well that governments spend a small fortune advertising on these platforms. They're some of these platforms' biggest advertising customers. It's the same problem we have with the mainstream media. They depend on the government for their revenue. And so it's not the government and the political party that's funding Fact Lab, but it's a highly compromised corporation that's been wedged in between. This reeks of fascism to me. Mussolini's definition... Sorry?
100%. And in between all of this, RMIT Fact Lab is also associated with ABC. So there's that relationship between the ABC as well. Mm-hmm. So it's all a bit incestuous when you look at it in this frame of mind. And onto the point about the government's pressure on companies like Facebook, what are we discussing right now in our country around this ACMA, misinformation, disinformation, this communications bill that they want to amend? So you have these companies who want to, play ball with the government in the sense of playing on their team almost. Hey guys, look, we're putting our hand up already. We're happy to spend some money here and help you with your pet project. Because at the end of the day, this is the Labor Party's one of their core election promises. This is not a government that is putting this out there saying, "Oh, we'll be happy with how people decide how the vote goes." They are very intently saying that we want a yes vote. So we have to keep all that in mind when we're seeing this type of interaction between, like you're saying, this type of fascism between these companies, governments, and then these institutions in the middle, which are also connected to the government as well. So it is this almost circle of patting each other on the back and controlling the flow of information.
100%.
That's what's very dangerous here. The flow of information is being controlled. It seems very subtle what they're doing, but it actually impacts people's ability to have these debates and have these discussions online.
Well, people might be surprised by the use of the word fascism in relation to this, so I just want to touch on that for just a second longer. Benito Mussolini, he's known as the father of fascism. He was kind of the first person to be called a fascist. The word fascia or fascist is based on an ancient Roman word for a part of the sandal that was actually bound together. It was where you kind of tied up the sandal. And the whole concept was that it was a merger, a tying together, a binding together of the corporate world and the state. And this is exactly what we're seeing here now, where Facebook are now beginning to integrate their operations and their fact-checking and everything else and the funding of fact-checking with the desires of the state. They're effectively operating as a government department in this regard. This is why I call it fascism. It literally meets the definition according to the first fascist, according to the father of fascism. But it gets to the point of absurdity, Rukshan, because we have now a situation where people employed by these fact-checking agencies, newly graduated uni grads with heads full of ideas and absolutely no real-world experience, are sitting there fact-checking 50 and 60 and 70-year-old professors at the end of their professional lives, or let's say a constitutional law expert who weighs in on the risk of the voice and what the impact might be. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say something crazy, Rukshan, that the 60-year-old professor of law, constitutional lawyer who spent their entire career in that area might know a little bit more about it than the fact-checker who's just graduated from uni, has done a quick Google search to check him. I mean, am I insane here, Rukshan?
No, you're not insane at all. And beyond all of that, we have this situation with the Voice to Parliament where we have experts on both sides of the discussion saying that they see constitutional issues. So we have people for and against who are lawyers. But when these fact checks are done, RMIT will call to authority and say legal experts and constitutional experts say that this particular thing is false. But on the other side, they have constitutional experts saying that it's true. So there is a problem there when these third parties get involved in adjudicating what is true and what is not, particularly on issues related to elections, right? These are nuanced topics. These are topics that people should be able to debate and discuss when politicians are out there, a lot of the time spreading misinformation themselves, let's be honest here, during elections, making promises, saying all manner of things that need to be contested by opposition governments and then also by the people. Like, we're being told to go vote for a very serious thing. And if that debate is going to be shaped now by Meta and by these fact checkers, that is entering into, this dangerous territory where we can't express ourselves on these platforms that, unfortunately we have to use because they do have a monopoly on these platforms. But we can't actually have these type of debates without that being, silenced.
Yeah.
It's very problematic. And, I'm very concerned about Meta's involvement. I mean, I was concerned about the referendum before, but when I see this news of these companies jumping on ship in this manner and knowing the history of these companies, I think a lot of Australians should start really focusing and paying attention now to what this actually means for the debate going ahead.
Rukshan, I'm very grateful for your time, but I do want to just keep you for a moment longer with one last thing, because twice now you've mentioned political promises, and you referred to the voice referendum as a core promise of the Labor Party. This is something that many have argued, in fact, that Anthony Albanese's political career kind of depends on. If this referendum fails, his career may well be over, certainly as Prime Minister, if not altogether. But it seems like there are promises and then there are promises, because I remember another core promise was that he was going to reduce power bills. And I haven't seen them fighting tooth and nail the way they're fighting tooth and nail for the yes vote to try and get my power bills down. I mean, I'm running a studio now. There's a lot of TVs and equipment and things. I'm sure you have the same problem. I haven't noticed my power bill going down since Anthony Albanese was elected. Have you?
No, I mean, it's Putin's price hike.
Absolutely. It's Putin's fault. Yes. Yes.
I wanted to use language from the Biden White House, but we have this situation where, like that's why it's important that people can have these debates and question these things, right? Because that is a form of misinformation, however you want to put it. During the election, the government was freely saying all these things. I've watched countless videos of Anthony Albanese making all types of promises. Now, today, the reality is they're facing different economic situations and different geopolitical situations, which, maybe that makes it difficult for them to say what those promises are today. But the fact that they don't get held account for that, you know what I mean?
Sure.
That they are not being told by even these fact checkers, they're not fact checking them, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there is this system in this country where these politicians are getting away with things when they need to. And for important topics like this referendum, the actual pressure is not on the politicians to be truthful and honest. It's on the people like us.
Yeah.
Because these fact checks aren't going to impact the ability for Anthony Albanese to get up there again on television and on podiums and tell us exactly what we're getting on The Voice.
Yeah.
It's going to impact the ability of people like me and you to counteract what he's saying and call him out for it. Because, like you said, the electricity prices, we're calling him out now, and it's showing you exactly what these people are capable of lying about when they're left unchecked.
Well, look, honestly, I genuinely blame the media for so much of what we're talking about here. I said back in 2009, when I first started as an independent political commentator, that if the media had done their job properly, there would have been no room for me. People used to laugh at me and say, oh, you're not qualified as a journalist. Exactly. So why am I now entering into this space and being embraced by an audience that is desperate for real information? There should have been no room for me. Honestly, Rukshan, with all respect, there should have been no room for you. When you showed up to the protests with a camera during the COVID lockdowns in Melbourne, people should have said, yes, we've already seen it. The news are already there. They're already showing us these exact same pictures, and yet they're not doing their job. And unfortunately, you and I are having to pick up the slack. Rukshan, thank you so much for joining us on the Aussie Wire. I look forward to having you again in the near future.
Thanks, Steph. Great being on.